It was a warm Friday evening, one of those deceptively quiet nights when the air feels still, but you can sense something is about to shift. I was sitting by the window in our living room, absent-mindedly flipping through the pages of an old book I'd meant to read for years but never did. My wife, Beatrice, had just come home from work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked into the room. Her face looked pale, her lips tight like she was holding back tears. I stood up, concerned. "Bea, everything okay?" She waved me off like I was an annoying coworker, not the man she'd spent a decade building a life with. "I'm fine, Edgar. I don't want to talk about it." Normally, I'd let it go. Beatrice wasn't the kind of person who spilled her emotions easily, and I'd learned not to push her when she was upset. But something about the way she avoided my eyes, the way her hands trembled as she poured herself a glass of wine, made me press further. "Did something happen at work? You're shaking." I stepped closer, trying to put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged me off and headed toward the stairs. "I said I'm fine," she snapped. "Just leave me alone for a minute, Edgar." The sharpness of her tone stunned me. Beatrice wasn't usually like this, at least not with me. Sure, we'd had our arguments, but nothing that ever left me questioning her love. Tonight, though, something felt different, darker. I followed her upstairs, standing outside the bedroom door as I listened to her rummage through the closet. After a few moments, she came out, clutching a sleek black dress I hadn't seen in years. It was the one she wore when we used to go out dancing, back when life was simpler, before the bills and work schedules took over. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "It's already late." She didn't answer me right away. Instead, she walked past me, brushing my shoulder like I wasn't even there. At the top of the stairs, she finally turned around. "I'm going out. I need to clear my head." "At this hour?" "Beatrice, come on, let's talk." "You don't need to." "I do need to." She cut me off, her voice cracking. "I can't breathe in this house right now." That stung. I didn't know what I'd done wrong, but the way she said it made me feel like I was suffocating her, like I was the problem. "All right, fine," I said, trying to keep my composure. "But can we at least talk about this when you get back?" She didn't answer. Instead, she hurried down the stairs, slipping on her heels at the door and grabbing her purse. I followed her, still holding onto some thread of hope that I could fix whatever was breaking between us. "Bea, please don't go like this," I pleaded. "Let's sit down and talk. You don't have to run away." She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Anger? Fear? "I'll be back later, Edgar," she said quietly. Then, as if to soften the blow, she added, "I just need some time." Before I could say another word, the door slammed shut, leaving me standing alone in the silence of our home. The hours dragged on. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty street, waiting for her to come back. Midnight came and went, and still no sign of Beatrice. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she with friends? Sitting alone at a bar? Or was it something else? Someone else? When the clock struck 2 a.m., headlights finally pierced the darkness outside. I heard the engine cut off and the sound of her heels clicking on the driveway. She opened the door quietly, like she was trying not to wake me, but I was already waiting in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. She froze when she saw me. Her makeup was smudged, her hair slightly disheveled. I noticed the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering in the air as she walked past me without a word. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "I told you I needed some time," she replied, not even bothering to look at me as she slipped off her shoes. "Time for what, Beatrice? It's the middle of the night. You come home looking like this." I gestured toward her, trying to keep the anger from spilling over. She sighed, exasperated, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Can we not do this right now? I'm tired." "No, Bea," I said, standing up. "We are doing this. You don't just walk out of here in tears, ignore me for hours, and come back smelling like someone else." "What's going on?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "You're imagining things, Edgar. I went out with friends. That's it. Which friends? I pressed, my gut telling me she was lying. God, why do you have to interrogate me every time I step out of this house? She snapped. This is exactly why I needed to leave tonight. You don't trust me, and it's exhausting. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I was just overthinking things, that my insecurities were twisting the truth. But the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Something had changed, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Beatrice in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, but it felt out of place. Too normal after the storm that had rolled through our house the night before. I stayed in bed for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, but the gnawing unease in my chest wouldn't let me rest. When I finally came downstairs, she was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when she heard me and offered a half-smile. "Morning. Morning," I replied, my voice flat. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, trying to read her expression. She looked calm, but it felt rehearsed, like she was playing a part. So, I began, breaking the silence. "Are we going to talk about last night?" She sighed, putting her phone down. "Edgar, I told you, I needed some time to myself. It's not a big deal." "It is to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been acting distant for weeks, B. And last night, you weren't just out with friends, were you?" Her eyes narrowed. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm not stupid, B," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "You came home at 2 a.m., looking like you'd been somewhere you shouldn't have been. Just tell me the truth." She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You're unbelievable. You know that? I'm not doing this with you, Edgar. You always assume the worst." "I'm not assuming anything," I shot back, standing up too. "I'm asking you to be honest with me. What's going on?" Her face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I thought she was going to explode. But instead, she laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "You want honesty?" she said, crossing her arms. "Fine. I went to the club. I danced. I had a few drinks. And yes, I talked to someone. But nothing happened, Edgar. So stop acting like I committed some kind of crime." "Talk to someone?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Who, B? Who did you talk to?" "It doesn't matter," she snapped. "It was just some guy. I don't even remember his name." Her words hit me like a brick wall. I wanted to believe her, but the casual way she said it, the way she dismissed it like it was nothing, made my stomach turn. "Do you even hear yourself?" I said quietly. "You don't think it's a problem that you're going out, getting drunk, and talking to random guys while your husband is sitting at home?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Edgar. Stop being so dramatic. I needed a break. That's all." "A break from what?" I asked, my voice rising. "From me? From our marriage?" Her silence said more than any words could have. She grabbed her coffee mug and walked toward the sink, her back to me. "You're overthinking this," she said, her tone dismissive. "I'm going to get ready for work." As she walked out of the room, I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop her. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The rest of the weekend passed in uneasy silence. Beatrice buried herself in her phone or went out on errands she didn't bother explaining. I tried to distract myself with work around the house, but every time I heard her phone buzz or caught her typing away with a little smile on her face, my stomach churned. Something was wrong, very wrong, but I felt paralyzed to confront her again. Sunday night, as we sat at opposite ends of the couch, I couldn't take it anymore. "B," I said, breaking the tension that had been simmering between us. "I feel like we're not even in the same marriage anymore. You're shutting me out, and I don't know why." She didn't even look up from her phone. "You're overthinking again, Edgar. I've just been stressed." "Stressed?" I repeated, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Then why won't you talk to me? Why do you keep running off and staying out so late?" Finally, she set her phone down and turned to me with an exasperated look. Because I need space, okay? Is that so hard for you to understand? Not everything is about you, Edgar. Her words hit me like a slap. I tried to think of what to say, how to fix this, but all I could do was sit there, stunned into silence. She picked up her phone again and started scrolling like I wasn't even there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over in my head. The way she said space, like being around me was suffocating her. The way she avoided eye contact like she was hiding something. And then there was the club. She hadn't even denied meeting someone. She just brushed it off like it didn't matter. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, I froze. She was sound asleep beside me, breathing softly, completely unaware. I stared at the glowing screen, debating whether I should pick it up. A part of me knew it was wrong, but another part, the part that was desperate for answers, couldn't resist. I reached over carefully, my heart pounding in my chest, and unlocked her phone. The first thing I saw was a message from someone named Kenny. Had a great time Friday night. Can't wait to see you again, winky face. My blood ran cold. My hands shook as I scrolled through the thread. There weren't many messages, just a handful, but every single one felt like a dagger to the heart. You looked amazing in that dress. Next time, maybe we ditch the club and go somewhere more private. And then her reply, we'll see, winky face asterisk. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Kenny? Who the hell was Kenny? My chest tightened as I realized this wasn't just paranoia. Beatrice wasn't just talking to someone. She was flirting, engaging, testing the waters. I locked the phone and put it back on the nightstand, my head spinning. 1,000 questions flooded my mind. How long had this been going on? Was it just flirting? Or was there more? And why wasn't I enough for her? The next morning, I couldn't even look at her. She got up, humming softly as she got ready for work, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Don't forget to take out the trash, she said casually as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I stared at her as she left, her heels clicking against the floor, and felt a mixture of anger and despair. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. I didn't want to accuse her without proof, without knowing the full extent of what was going on. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore this anymore. That day, I called in sick to work and spent hours replaying everything in my head. The way she dismissed me, the lies, the message from Kenny. It all pointed to one thing, something I couldn't bring myself to say out loud. By the time she came home that evening, I'd made up my mind. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. That night, Beatrice came home late again. She had texted earlier, saying she was working late on a big project. But I knew better. Every little detail felt like a lie now, and my patience was wearing thin. She walked in, breezing past me with a faint smile like nothing was wrong. Long day? I asked, my voice betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. She nodded, not even looking at me as she kicked off her heels. Exhausting, she said, grabbing a glass of water. I'm going to bed. I watched her walk upstairs, feeling a familiar pang of helplessness. But this time I wasn't just going to sit there and let her lies pile up. As soon as she was out of sight, I grabbed her laptop bag from the counter. She never locked her laptop. She wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and I'd helped her set it up myself. My hands shook as I opened it and logged in, feeling like a criminal in my own home. The first thing I checked was her email. Nothing suspicious, just work stuff and a few online shopping receipts. But when I opened her calendar, my stomach dropped. There was no big project at work, no late-night meetings. The only event listed for that night was a dinner reservation. For two. The location, a restaurant downtown. One I'd never been to with her. The reservation was under her name, but something told me she hadn't been dining alone. My heart raced as I clicked through her history, trying to find more. That's when I found it. A payment confirmation for a hotel room booked last week. The date matched the night she came home at 2 a.m. I felt sick. My chest tightened as the pieces started falling into place. The messages from Kenny, the late nights, the distance. She wasn't just flirting with someone. She was meeting him, spending time with him, maybe even… No, I couldn't think about that. Not yet. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. I needed to know more. I couldn't confront her with half-truths or vague suspicions. I needed proof, something undeniable. And that's when it hit me, her phone. If there were answers, they'd be in there. Later that night, while Beatrice slept soundly beside me, I reached for her phone again. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, half expecting her to wake up at any moment. The messages from Kenny were still there, but this time I scrolled back further, looking for anything I might have missed. What I found made my blood boil. There were photos, selfies of her in that black dress, taken in a hotel mirror. One of them even had a caption, "Can't wait to see you tonight, winky face." And then there were messages, dozens of them, exchanged over the past few weeks. They weren't just flirting. They were planning. Dates, dinners, nights out. Everything she'd lied to me about was laid bare in those texts. One message in particular sent me over the edge. "I can't stop thinking about you. Being with you feels like freedom." Freedom. That's what I was to her. A cage she wanted to escape from. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the messages, my vision blurring with anger and betrayal. She'd been lying to my face, sneaking around, pretending everything was fine while she tore our marriage apart behind my back. I locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, my hands shaking with rage. I wanted to wake her up right then and there, to confront her with everything I'd found. But something stopped me. I realized that if I did, she'd deny it, twist the truth, make excuses. She was good at that, too good. If I wanted to confront her, I needed to be prepared. I needed to have everything lined up so she couldn't talk her way out of it. The next morning, I made a decision. If she wasn't going to be honest with me, I'd find out the truth on my own terms. After she left for work, I called a private investigator. It felt extreme, like something out of a bad TV drama, but I didn't see any other way. I needed to know exactly what she was doing, where she was going, and who she was with. The PI's name was Russ. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and when I explained the situation, he didn't even flinch. "You'd be surprised how often I get calls like this," he said. "Give me a week. I'll get you what you need." A week felt like an eternity, but I agreed. For now, all I could do was wait, and keep up the charade of being the clueless, trusting husband. By the time Beatrice came home that night, I had calmed down enough to act normal. I greeted her with a smile, asked about her day, and even offered to cook dinner. She seemed caught off guard by my sudden change in attitude, but she didn't question it. If anything, she looked relieved. As we sat down to eat, I watched her carefully, studying every little movement, every glance at her phone. She was a good liar, but now that I knew what to look for, the cracks were obvious. The way she avoided eye contact, the way she smiled just a little too brightly, it all screamed guilt. And yet, she had no idea I was on to her. She thought she'd gotten away with it, that I was still the naive, trusting husband who would never question her. But she was wrong. The days that followed were excruciating. Every time Beatrice left the house, I couldn't help but wonder where she was really going and who she was with. I tried to keep my mind occupied, but no amount of distraction could silence the storm brewing inside me. Every time her phone buzzed or she smiled at a text, it felt like another knife twisting in my gut. Russ, the private investigator, called me on the third day. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, but what he said made my heart race. "She's meeting someone regularly," he said. "I've got photos, timestamps, and locations. It's not looking good." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "Where is she meeting him?" "Hotels, mostly," Russ replied. "There's one in particular she seems to favor downtown. I've got footage of them entering together last night." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. "Can you send me the photos?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're on their way," Russ said. "Let me know if you want me to keep digging." After we hung up, I sat there in silence, staring at my phone as the photos came in. Each one felt like a hammer blow to the chest. There she was, my wife, smiling and laughing with another man as they walked into a hotel lobby together. The man, Kenny, I assumed, looked younger than me, taller, with an air of confidence that made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. I needed a plan, a way to make her face the truth without giving her the chance to weasel her way out of it. That evening, when Beatrice came home, I played the part of the clueless husband once again. I greeted her with a smile, asked how her day was, and even offered to pour her a glass of wine. She seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed, as if she believed her lies were safe and sound. "You seem happy," I said casually as we sat down to dinner. She shrugged, taking a sip of wine. "Work's been going well. I think things are finally falling into place." Falling into place? The irony wasn't lost on me. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending to be none the wiser. Inside, though, I was boiling. She was sitting there, lying to my face, acting like everything was fine while she tore our marriage apart. Later that night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had the proof I needed, but I still wasn't sure how to confront her. Every scenario I played out in my head ended in disaster. If I accused her, she'd deny it. If I showed her the photos, she'd twist the story, make excuses. And if I lost my temper, she'd find a way to paint me as the villain. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed to wait for the right moment, the moment she couldn't talk her way out of. By the time the weekend arrived, the tension in the house was almost unbearable. Beatrice was her usual self, calm, composed, and entirely unbothered. But now that I had seen the truth, every word she said, every smile she gave, felt like a slap in the face. I spent most of my time pretending to work, but in reality, I was planning. The photos Russ sent me were damning, but I needed the perfect moment to use them. Saturday evening, Beatrice told me she had plans. "Some of the girls from work are having a late dinner," she said casually while fixing her hair in the mirror. "I probably won't be back until late." "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Have fun." Her reflection in the mirror flickered with hesitation for just a moment before she turned back to her makeup. I watched her closely, taking note of the extra effort she was putting into her appearance. Her dress hugged her figure just right. Her lipstick was a shade brighter than usual, and the perfume she chose was one she rarely wore, one I'd bought for a special anniversary years ago. As she walked out the door, I felt a pang of bitterness. That dress, that perfume, they were meant for me, for us. Now they were being used to impress someone else. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I grabbed my keys and followed her. Russ had told me about the hotel Beatrice frequented with Kenny, so I parked my car down the street and waited. Sure enough, after about 30 minutes, her car pulled into the lot. I slumped low in my seat, watching as she stepped out and adjusted her dress before heading toward the entrance. Moments later, a familiar figure approached her. Kenny. Seeing them together in person was a different kind of pain. The way she smiled at him, the way he placed a hand on her lower back as they walked inside, it was like watching a stranger. This wasn't the Beatrice I thought I knew. This was someone else entirely. I waited in the car for over an hour, my mind racing with thoughts of what they were doing, what lies she would tell when she got home. Part of me wanted to storm inside, to confront her and Kenny in front of everyone. But I held back. If I went in now, I'd lose the upper hand. I needed to stay calm, to wait until the time was right. She came home around 1 a.m., smelling faintly of alcohol and Kenny's cologne. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, when she walked in. "Hey," she said, her voice overly casual. "You're still up?" "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not looking away from the screen. "How was dinner?" "It was fine," she said quickly, kicking off her heels. "The girls and I had a lot of catching up to do." "Glad to hear it," I said, finally turning to look at her. She seemed flustered, like she wasn't expecting me to ask. What did you guys talk about? Oh, the usual. Work, family, boring stuff. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded slowly, pretending to believe her. Sounds like a nice night. She mumbled something about being tired and headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. As I listened to her footsteps fade, I knew I couldn't wait much longer. The cracks in her lies were starting to show, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The next day, I called Russ and told him to keep following her, to dig up every last piece of evidence he could find. If she was going to lie to my face, then I was going to make sure she couldn't escape the truth when the time came. As the week went on, Beatrice continued her charade, acting like everything was fine. She laughed at my jokes, kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, and even suggested we have dinner together one night. But I could see through it all now. Her affection wasn't genuine. It was a mask, a way to keep me blind to what was really going on. But I wasn't blind anymore. I was watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to bring her lies to light. By Wednesday, I had more evidence than I knew what to do with. Russ had sent me photos, videos, even receipts showing that Beatrice and Kenny had been seeing each other for weeks. Each piece of evidence was like a dagger, but I knew I had to keep my emotions in check. If I confronted her too soon, she'd twist it, deny it, maybe even gaslight me. No, I needed her cornered with no way out. That evening, she came home earlier than usual. She seemed cheerful, almost too cheerful, as if she was trying to overcompensate. "I thought I'd cook tonight," she said, smiling as she set her purse down. "That's nice of you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Anything special?" "Just pasta," she said, glancing at her phone. "Something simple." As she moved around the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice how relaxed she looked, like she wasn't carrying the weight of a massive lie. Meanwhile, I was struggling to keep my composure. My mind raced with everything I'd seen, her texts, the hotel visits, the way she smiled at Kenny. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I began, trying to sound casual. "Are you still keeping in touch with any old friends from college?" She froze for just a second, her back to me. "Not really," she said, her voice carefully even. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said, shrugging. "Just curious. I figured someone might have reached out." She turned around, forcing a smile. "Nope, just work friends these days." I nodded, biting back the urge to call her out. Good to know. The tension was thick as she went back to cooking, but I didn't press further. Not yet. I needed her to think she was still in control. That night, after dinner, she went to bed early, claiming she was exhausted. I stayed up, pacing the living room, replaying our conversation over and over. The way she lied so easily, so confidently, made my skin crawl. She had no idea I already knew everything. I decided that the next time she went out with friends, I'd follow her myself. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, to watch her lies unravel in real time. It wasn't enough to have photos or texts. I needed the truth, raw and undeniable. As I finally climbed into bed that night, I glanced at her sleeping face, wondering how someone I loved so much could betray me like this. But instead of feeling sadness, all I felt was cold resolve. The time for playing along was almost over. Friday came, and Beatrice was back to her old routine of dressing up and going out with the girls. This time, though, I didn't bother pretending to believe her. I stayed quiet, watching her every move as she stood in front of the mirror, applying lipstick and fluffing her hair. "You look nice," I said casually from the couch. "Big night planned." She glanced at me through the mirror, her smile tight. "Just dinner and drinks. Don't wait up." Her words were so nonchalant, so practiced, that I almost laughed at how easily they rolled off her tongue. But I just nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Have fun." As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time, I stayed closer, keeping her car in sight as she drove downtown. She parked in the same lot Russ had told me about, and, sure enough, Kenny was waiting for her by the entrance to the hotel. They greeted each other with a hug, her smile brighter than it had been in months. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Seeing it with my own eyes was worse than any photo or text message. This wasn't just a fling. There was affection, familiarity, something deeper that twisted my stomach into knots. I waited for an hour before deciding it was time. I wasn't going to sit in the car like a coward anymore. I needed her to see me, to know that her lies were over. Walking into the hotel, I felt a strange mix of anger and clarity. I asked the receptionist for the room number under Beatrice's name. At first, she hesitated, but after a little persistence and a flash of my ID, she relented. I stood outside the door, my heart pounding as I raised my fist to knock. Part of me wanted to barge in, to catch them red-handed, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knocked twice, loud and deliberate. After a few moments, the door opened, and there she was, Beatrice, standing in a silk robe, her face going pale the moment she saw me. Behind her, Kenny stood frozen, his shirt unbuttoned, a look of pure panic on his face. "Edgar," she stammered, clutching the robe tighter around herself. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside, ignoring her question. "So this is what you've been doing on your girls' nights." My voice was steady, but the anger in it was unmistakable. "It's not what it looks like," she blurted out, her face flushing red. "I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, cutting her off. I turned to Kenny, who looked like he was about to bolt. "And you? What? Couldn't find your own wife to ruin?" Kenny opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. Beatrice stepped forward, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. "Edgar, let's talk about this at home. Please." I shook my head, pulling out my phone. "No, B. We're talking about it now. Because I have proof, photos, texts, everything. You don't get to lie your way out of this." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "You've been spying on me?" she whispered. "Spying?" I laughed bitterly. "No, I've been uncovering the truth because you wouldn't give it to me. And now I'm done." The room was silent as my words hung in the air. Beatrice looked at me, then at Kenny, and back again as if searching for something. An excuse, a way out, anything. But there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with the weight of her betrayal. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. The lies were over, the charade exposed. It was time to take the next step alone. Walking out of that hotel was the hardest yet most liberating thing I had ever done. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The weight of her lies, the months of suspicion and heartache, had finally lifted, but it left behind an emptiness I wasn't prepared for. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city, letting the cool night air clear my mind. I ended up at a park we used to visit years ago when things were simpler. Sitting on a bench under the stars, I let everything sink in. The betrayal, the lies, the end of a marriage I thought was built on trust. The next morning, I returned home to find Beatrice waiting for me in the kitchen. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smudged like she'd been crying all night. She looked up as I walked in, her hands clasped tightly around a mug of coffee. "Edgar," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I set my keys on the counter and crossed my arms. "Talk about what?" "You've said enough." Her lips trembled as she tried to find the right words. "I'm sorry," she said finally. I don't know what came over me. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. "A mistake? Beatrice, mistakes don't last for weeks. Mistakes don't involve hotel reservations and texts to someone named Kenny." She flinched at his name, and for the first time, I saw shame in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice cold. "You managed to do just that." Over the next hour, she tried to explain herself, but her excuses were as empty as the promises she'd made over the years. She blamed stress, loneliness, even me, for not being there for her. But no matter how much she twisted the narrative, the truth remained the same. She had chosen to betray me. When she realized I wasn't going to forgive her, her tone shifted. The tears dried up, and the regret was replaced with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "If you want to throw away everything we've built, that's on you. But don't act like you're some saint in all of this." "Throw it away?" I repeated, my voice rising. You destroyed it the moment you stepped into that hotel room with him." Her face hardened, but she didn't say another word. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the remnants of our broken life. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers were filed. Beatrice moved out, taking only what she could carry. I didn't care about the house, the furniture, or the memories we'd made there. All I cared about was cutting ties with the woman who had betrayed me. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and awkward conversations with friends and family. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but I kept the details to myself. It wasn't their business, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to explain. Russ, the private investigator, checked in once more, offering his support. "You did the right thing," he said. "It's better to know the truth, even if it hurts." He was right. The truth had been painful, but it also set me free. I didn't have to live in the shadow of her lies anymore. I could finally move forward, even if the road ahead was uncertain. Months later, I found myself smiling again. It wasn't easy, but piece by piece, I rebuilt my life. I started new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even went on a few dates. I wasn't ready to open my heart again, but I was learning to be okay on my own. As for Beatrice, I heard through mutual friends that things didn't work out with Kenny. Apparently, the same charm that lured her away from me wasn't enough to build something lasting. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sorry for her. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Looking back, I realized that losing Beatrice wasn't the end of my world. It was the beginning of a new one, a better one. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.